the way we treat and produce and consume animals is not sustainable, it's not safe, and it's not something that we can continue with. The association between of zoonotic diseases and animals and animal consumption and the proliferation of zoonotic diseases has caused this concern in the minds of people, and I think it's become more prevalent in the minds of the public than ever before, that the way we treat and produce and consume animals is not sustainable, it's not safe, and it's not something that we can continue with. Many different languages, that we're all working towards a common goal. Throwing the politics of today out the window and saying, you know, this hasn't worked for us, it hasn't worked for animals, it's obviously destroyed our ecological systems that support us and the rest of the species in the world, and so we need to do something different. A passionate dedication to creating an alternative narrative to how society can look, how governments can function, and what the world can look like. Because the pandemic has had a tremendously negative effect on our economy, on loss of life, on our social institutions, that it's also an opportunity for us to think about how do we come out of this and make the most of this, which any government should be considering. You know, marginalized workers who are being exploited during this time, especially in, you know, the animal use industries and slaughterhouses and such, where they have minimal protections, minimal safeguards for the risks of exposure. Obviously, we've seen it. You know, the largest exposure in Canada is at Cargill and Alberta, but in the States as well, there's been mass slaughterhouse shutdowns due to the proliferation of COVID in these areas, and this is just because there's lack of education, lack of safety, and lack of kind of any sort of responsibility for these workers who are very vulnerable and terribly exploited. You know, we need to be fighting for them too, as animal advocates or as environmental advocates or as any individual who is concerned about this disease or concerned about you know, sort of any social justice issues. Is we have to be recognizing how they're being exploited as well. At the end of the day, we're talking about the health of people, animals, and the environment. So nobody stands to lose from these recommendations being implemented. There's a long history of subsidizing the animal agriculture sector here in Canada, and the Canadian government seems you know, seems to want to go ahead and continue that, rather than saying, well, you know, maybe now's not the time to continue to supply these subsidies. And furthermore, maybe we should now be encouraging them, while production is reduced, to transition off of these subsidies into plant-based agriculture instead, which really fits in with this whole messaging around the shift our society needs to take to a more plant-based society. The international transport of live animals, of course, something here that, of course, we transport many animals to the United States, and then there's things like the transport of live horses to Japan for slaughter as well, which has been kind of on a lot of people's radar because of the Canadian Horse Defense Coalition. You know, phasing out subsidies for the meat and dairy industry, because we know one way or the other, the animals are suffering in these industries. One of the biggest things right now is that it's more expensive to buy healthy, especially organic, non-GMO vegetables than it is to just buy cheap vegetables or cheap meat or dairy products, right? And so that's a really difficult barrier for a lot of people to eat healthy, is the cost, right? Do we need to tax meat as a part of that? Do we need to tax dairy products because of the downstream negative health consequences that they impose and that we all end up paying for through our healthcare system related to these products? So, you know, we have to rethink how we do these things. And the same with the fisheries. And the problem is that it's not just a, these issues just aren't social, and they're not just political, they're also geographical. So it's very difficult. For example, right now on the West Coast, we see like a proposal for a harvest of seals and sea lions, pinnipeds, by basically herring fishermen. And salmon fishermen, because there's been this transition for them of the government saying, the herring fisheries have collapsed, the southern resident killer whales are, their population is obviously endangered. We have to take some action to limit these exploitative activities on the marine environment in this area. Now, for them, that's, a really difficult situation, because they don't necessarily know anything else, right? So for them, they say, well, what else can we effectively, if we can't catch, herring and salmon, then what can we do? Oh, well, there's all these seals, which to them are considered pests. Maybe we could start a business sealing, basically. And so they're trying to put this proposal forward to the federal government, the DFO, that we can to start a seal harvest here. And they want to start by killing 50,000 seals and sea lions by reducing the population in half. And so you see that geographically, they're sort of trapped in that they don't really know what else they can do, because they're coastally situated in more remote communities where there's not a lot of opportunities for other businesses to arise. Maybe there's opportunities for ecotourism to be developed, but there's probably a limited number of jobs in that area as well. And so we really have to be mindful of how is the government going to subsidize and transition people in these more rural or remote communities that rely on extractive resource extraction industries to sustain themselves, because it's not fair for us, as much as we want to make these positive changes, to go in and simply, wipe out people's livelihoods. We want to be compassionate to their experience, to their, their desire to live meaningful and fulfilling lives as well. And so, that may mean making sure that they have access to retraining resources, educational resources. Maybe it means buying out the contracts that they currently have, so that they have money to sustain them, or to offer them resettling kind of funds, so that they can, if they decide that they no longer want to stay in those areas, they can relocate. So, we really have to think of it from a very kind of holistic perspective, and not just, leave people out of the equation while we're trying to protect animals and the environment from what people are doing. Because in many cases, people they're just doing their job. They don't necessarily think about the larger consequences it has on society and our ecology. So that's very important.